few new people.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and start. This is a lessons learned session. My name is Tel Dietrich. I'm with the LCRA. Okay.
I'm Ed Hubbs. I'm with Tri-County Prescribed Burn Association and Audubon, Nebraska. We're here, like Tel said, we're going to talk about lessons learned, and Tel's going to get us started. Go back to that conversation we kind of started a little early, I guess, but we can revisit that, where Tel was asking everybody how often, if you are in a PBA, or even if you're not in a PBA, but just to help other people burn, how often do you guys get together? Do you see each other outside of burns? Was kind of the direction we were going with that conversation.
Yeah, so in the last session they were talking about starting burn associations, and I know of other associations that don't meet quarterly or monthly, and both with your officer team and just your general membership. So we probably go to 10 or 15 meetings associated with our PBA throughout the year. How do we build community? Over meals, right? We sit together and we visit. How do we build rapport? Am I saying that right? Rapport? Side by side, working together. So if our PBA only works together, our rapport will not be as good. Okay, we won't have the fellowship. But when we meet and eat together, so one major part of meeting for a burn day is having a meal there when we're done, or time for us to all sit and visit and discuss, and that goes beyond burn stuff. We visit about everything. We know our neighbors, and if you look at the maps of the LCRA, we're all neighbors. We're all connected. Pretty much every one of my neighbors is involved with Prescribed Fire in some way. So I would encourage you, if you're not meeting regularly, do it. You will not have success if you're not meeting together. And then the other lesson learned is competency, and we build competency through practice. So sometimes we say, well, it's only 50 acres, it's only 20 acres. Oh, it's a small burn, it's only 200 acres. It doesn't matter if you're going to build a PBA, you just need to get fire on the ground. When is a good time to get fire on the ground? Well, we've said that already. It's always, or any time that you can. So don't get stuck into thinking that March and April is burn season. For most people, to kill big trees or larger trees, that is true. But if we're looking at species composition shift on rangeland and variability on landscape, we can look at, I want to shift my little bluestem community a little bit, and I'm only going to burn, like this pasture's grazed, but we know that little bluestem is not grazed very hard and it carries fire. We can just burn a ridgetop. We can just burn a small section to get the community together, working side by side, and be successful. And if we understand that tree species in the grass base is far and above the place to kill them before they get big, we can build success and help landowners know that they are ahead of the curve. Okay, so don't allow your membership to not understand the function of fire only in the wildfire situation. Like, we're applying fire and we only see it with big flames and dangerous situations, and we want to expose them, not at the level that the LCRA mostly burns, is like as close as we can get below that. We want to expose them on cold days, higher humidity days, growing season burns. We want to build that variability in to build confidence. So the LCRA for 10 years burnt what we would look at now as unsuccessfully, where some of the early members stopped burning as much because the success wasn't there, but the expense was high. So we gained experience, but we were not as successful percentage-wise. Like when we look back, we say, well, we definitely slowed the progression, but we were not burning in that 70% kill and above. Whereas now we are, some of those older members have always been there, but now they're starting to burn more. So building that confidence and that competency into the system. So those would be 2, maybe 3 lessons learned from us is community and rapport by having regular meetings together, and then understanding fire science to where we can apply it any time of the year, and then applying, getting out there and putting little or big fire on the landscape to assist those two. So do you have?
Yeah, does anybody have any comments or questions about things? Yeah, go for it.
The permits, was that a hurdle to build, to do the permit to build fuel, or was that something you were kind of already accustomed to doing if there was, maybe a less rotation period?
So why would we not want to defer? Why would a landowner or producer not want to defer? Yeah, it's expensive, right? Because either if you're a landowner and have a tenant, you're forsaking cash flow. You got to pay, in Nebraska, you got to pay taxes on that thing, and you're just barely covering it with rent.
My question is that the major hurdle?
Well, I'm answering that in 2. So profitability, and then the other one would be not wanting to, the one that people don't think about is not wanting to be involved in government programs whatsoever, right? We're just not interested in that. And those are legitimate concerns, I think, for what we see out west. And then those are real concerns. Whether we think they're legitimate or not, they occur. And we can't force the landowner to do something he doesn't want, and we don't want to because we believe in private property rights. But we have utilized NRCS, but we're talking about patch burn grazing, but we're also talking about variability in the system based on timing of grazing. So I use the example of Little Blue Stem to allow us to burn 5 acres. Is that really going to make a difference on a 1,000-acre grazing unit, even though, no matter how many pastures are in it, right? So that's why we want to think about developing flexibility into our association and then into our thinking of how we're applying. Is that answering your question?
I just wondered what did a vast majority of landowners are like, I can't do this because I can't afford to give it up. If you have to convince them, like, if you don't do this, you're never going to be able to stop this thing. So
I still,
isn't it easy to think?
I don't think I've convinced anybody so far. Of all the people that I've talked to, from early stage encroachment to where we can actually look at the property and see the tree claim and see the progression, to other places that are very dense in trees, I think the only thing that convinced them was actually going out and being on their own property and realizing I'm stuck. I can't do anything else. And some people still won't allow that. They refuse to see it for whatever reason, whether it's they're afraid, liability, or just plain aesthetic value. They like trees. They want some other view. So.
And I'll add in my perspective from further east in the state, a little bit more rainfall. We do get questions about that. A lot more of my burns are related with CRP compliance burning, and so we don't always have the issues around deferring grazing. But we do at times have, we do come into that sometimes. And one of the things that we can do, given our moisture regime, is we can still graze for the first part of a year, maybe through June, even into July sometimes, kind of depending upon how the rainfall's been, and still be able to build up some fuel. But it also depends on the objectives and what you're trying to burn. You can get away, if your trees are smaller, you can get away with having less fuel. So it can be on a case by case, and I think what Tell said is really, you got to work with that or talk with that individual landowner and get them, you almost have to let them come to the conclusion of, if I'm gonna have a successful burn, I have to have enough fuel, and how do I have enough fuel? And so it can be an issue. Some of the cost-sharing opportunities help us get over that hurdle. It's very real what Tel said. Some people are like, nope, I'm not taking any money. You know, I don't care what it is. I don't want to be told if I take this money, I don't want to be told how to manage my land. So that is definitely something that comes into play. But in my experience, the best thing when I've had people who were struggling to make the decision or trying to decide if it was necessary, the best thing I could do is go for a walk with them on their property. And that has really led to just conversations with them one-on-one and has allowed them to kind of realize short-term loss versus long-term gain kind of decisions. And so that's been a part of it too. How are we doing on time? 8 minutes. Okay.
When we talk about variability built into the system, we know that based on other work that we're listening to here, that we do not necessarily have to defer. Okay, and we've stuck that. I have that stuck in my head. But even from an evolutionary standpoint, it's not absolutely necessary. But we have got to start breaking down some barriers mentally to understand how can I apply fire in a more variable system on a smaller scale related to the big scale. And I think that would be some of the work that I listened to in Oklahoma that Morgan did several years ago. So
another thing I'll say too, as far as deferring or not, is there have been some landowners I've worked with who have decided not to, and the discussion instead kind of turned to, okay, well, we can still burn this, there's still going to be enough fuel to carry a fire, but we're going to really just be targeting the small trees. And that if the landowner has a skid steer or something and is willing to then go after the big trees themselves, they can do that. There's other things that you can do, like cutting and stuffing, to try to encourage more fuel in the areas where you need it. So there are some workarounds, but sometimes deferment is a good option. Some folks, we don't always have the options where we're at because of smaller land holdings, but there are also times when I've worked with landowners to shut off certain tanks, or hydrants, and not have them run, to try to intentionally keep the cows kind of away from an area to let it build more fuel if that's one of the areas that we're really targeting. So there's not just cross fencing, but there are other things. You can put out mineral and stuff to try to draw them to certain parts, or to Tel's point, doing a patch burn one year or a little bit, as part of your plan for a bigger burn can pull some of that pressure away too and allow some more fuel to build up.
And don't get me wrong, we'll be deferring and burning for a long time where I'm from. So that's part of it. So
yeah, the other thing is,
go ahead.
There's a lot of people who you try to explain to them, a maintenance burn isn't necessarily the same as a restoration burn. If you're trying to overcome that hurdle of trees that are already in place, the next time around you won't have to defer as long, or maybe not at all. So that's another discussion piece that I'll have with landowners. Go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to second what's kind of worked for us is exactly like what you guys said, just managing expectations. Like, okay, we can't afford to defer the whole season. The conversation with some landowners that I work with goes, well, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it right, so help me do it right. And there's more than one way to do it right, though. And in order to fit that in, a pasture with, 20-foot tall cedar trees, you can do a maintenance burn on that pasture too, and kill just as many trees. Yeah, you'll have the big ones left, but it's, there's all sorts of tools in the toolbox. So like managing that expectation of, okay, if we're going to use this tool in this certain way, this is what our result is going to be. So that's, yeah. Just managing that expectation of how much do you want to do? Okay, then that's what our results are going to be, and no one practice there, is going to support the myth of restoration. There's going to be follow up one way or another, and so
that is also can be a barrier, something that some people don't think of when they first come to me for advice or things, is they think they can burn once, and then they don't have to do it ever again the rest of their life. And it's like, no, this needs to become part of just your management plan. And so that's part of the process of thinking long-term how you're gonna operate, how you're gonna handle your operation.
Other questions? Anybody have any other questions? Go ahead.
I'm just kind of curious, especially you guys in the Kansas, like, how do you, especially before the burn, handle the communication of lining up, especially personnel and equipment? Like, I see the pictures of you guys and how much, just the rows of stuff you have there.
Yeah, so we have an email system. We, as pointless as it seems to me, every meeting we talk about who has burns coming up. And there is some benefit in that if you hear that your neighbor has one and you didn't know that, and you find out if you border them, something like that. But it's always on the front is talk to your neighbors. So our email list is pretty regular. That's how we get together for meetings, and then the actual meetings get people up to speed all the time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, just kind of give you some background. I mean, it just seems like burns that I help line up, like, I'm always in an absolute panic beforehand. Like, I'm worried I'm going to show up and we're not going to have enough stuff to meet the minimum requirements. It always ends up there's way more people and equipment than we need, which is nice, but I'm just kind of, it'd be nice to, like, have a system where people are just communicating better and I know exactly what's going to be there.
We do use Google Excel as a sign-up sheet, variable results, but it helps us get people and personnel kind of figured out beforehand. So the burn line teams are roughly set up. So the email goes out, we're looking at Wednesday, here's the sign-up sheet, please say who you are and what you're bringing. So that helps.
Yeah, the way our PBA operates is we just send out a mass email to all of our volunteers and give a date and a time and a location, and we say you must RSVP. It's not I'll just show up. It's you have to RSVP, so that way we can have a head count. I don't know if you will ever shake the little bit of nerves, as you're lining stuff up, but we make people reply, and then we make a completely separate email for just the people who replied, and then they get updates usually once a day as we approach the actual burn date. We're usually sending out an email about 3 days in advance to try to recruit people. So then 2 days in advance, we'll send an email to everybody who responded that basically says, weather's still holding, same time, or, weather forecast changed, we're going to start 2 hours earlier, things like that. But then we'll also try to clarify in those emails who's bringing what. Our association provides and maintains a lot of the equipment. Some of the other associations, individual volunteers have their own. We have a mix of both. We have a handful of people who'll show up with UTVs and tanks and stuff like that. But we also, our association, which is a task in and of itself to have a volunteer who wants to do the maintenance on a shared piece of equipment. But that's how we have found to try to ensure that we have enough people and enough equipment, is we just then have a separate email for updates and make sure that people are aware, and we tell them, if you don't RSVP for the burn, you will not get updated. And I have had a couple people show up to a burn site because they didn't respond and they didn't know the burn got canceled. And so then they showed up and that person hasn't done it again. They RSVP from now on. And so it is kind of a harsh way to learn the lesson, but we're volunteers organizing it, and so, our time should be taken into account too. Yeah.
One thing I've learned working with a lot of PBAs in Oklahoma is the app GroupMe. It's a group messaging app, and you put in your phone number to it. And the best thing about, if you're doing a group text, what sucks when it gets blown up with a bunch of messages and you can mute it, and we found that to be really useful for coordinating burns. And you can do the same thing and separate the people who RSVP and put them in a different group message. Really easy, user-friendly. So GroupMe.
The last thing I will say is, for public awareness, our email doesn't just go out to PBA members. It goes out to KRVN, it goes out to all of our fire chiefs, it goes out to, and if somebody isn't on it that wants to be, with like our land managers and stuff like that, we want them to be involved. And then landowners in the area that are absentee, they can also be on that. So there's no end to who may or may not be on that email list.
Yeah,
So-
our email list is probably 200 members strong, and in any given year, we probably only have 50 active volunteers and members. So it is, we don't, you know, we're not shy. You're gonna see the smoke plume, you know, it's gonna be pretty obvious what we're doing. So we try to, you know, spread the word and recruit anybody. We would rather have more help than not enough, kind of thing. I think we're done on time. I'll stick around for a little bit longer if anybody wants to have any more questions or ask anything else. Otherwise, I think we're ready to head on to the next rooms.
Thank you, guys.